In this video, we'll talk about keys and scales and how these terms differ one from another and how they're related. We'll talk about key signatures and how to properly write them and how these ideas tie back to our old friend, the circle of fifths. When we understand the circle of fifths, key signatures shouldn't pose a big challenge. They are kind of a natural outcome, right, of the circle of fifths. So my advice is, if the discussion starts becoming a little bit onerous and difficult, go back and brush up on the circle of fifths. That can clear a lot of things up. But before we get to key signatures, we first need to clarify the difference between scale and key. We've seen that a scale is a collection of notes that informs musical composition. A major scale, for example, has 7 notes, 7 scale degrees, which follow a specific pattern of whole tones and semitones. A key is a more specific thing. It has a narrower definition. It's not just a collection, a set of notes. But also we need to be cautious here, because in music, many terms are recycled. And so they have different meanings depending on the context, right? They're reused in different contexts. A musical key is a very different thing than a physical key of a keyboard or an organ, the white keys and black keys that we have been talking about and will continue to talk about. In this context, relating to scales and the circle of fifths, the key means a specific network of relationships between a scale's scale degrees. This network dictates how scale degrees behave and how they interact with one with another. Some of these relationships include the following. Here are 2 examples. Scale degree 1, or tonic, is a place of repose and stability. Pieces typically start and end on 1. Scale degree 5, on the other hand, which is also called the dominant, is the opposition to tonic. It represents tension, instability, and a yearning to go back to stability, to tonic. If a piece ends on the dominant, it feels unfinished. So likewise, a lot of pieces will end with just that, a movement from 5, dominant, back to 1, tonic. There's something very, very satisfying about this resolution of instability to stability, right? Of tension and repose. Basically, all classical music, from the Baroque and the classical, and even most of the romantic music, will do just that, will end and feature all the way throughout this opposition of dominant and tonic. There are many other standard relationships in a key. These arguably are the most important, but there are other relationships, and we will deal with them at a later occasion. But for now, I think it is just sufficient to know that keys are more than scales. They're more than just collections of notes. They involve norms and expectations that have evolved over time, that tell us how scale degrees should interact one with another. Pieces or songs are said to be in the key of fill in the blank, any of the major scales we have discussed, for example, C major, F sharp major, G major, D major, B flat major, etc. So look at the example below. This is an excerpt, just the very beginning of a sonata for piano by Haydn, Franz Joseph Haydn. Notice that it consistently uses B flat, right? A number of places here, A flat also happening throughout, and E flat. These 3 sharps are associated with the key of, these 3 flats are associated with the key of E flat major. So, if you look at this, we can infer that it is an E flat major. Now, when we do this, we write each note with the accidental that it needs, right? We're actually using a lot of ink, and we're cluttering the score a great deal. If we are in E flat major, like we are in this excerpt, chances are all or most B's will be B flats anyway, A's will be A flats, E's will be E flats. So instead of cluttering the score with this amount of accidentals, all of this ink, we actually turn to a shortcut, which is the key signature. The key signature is placed at the beginning of the staff after the clef and before the time signature right there. And like the clef, it is repeated in every step to remind us performers that we're playing in this particular key. And notice how the same excerpt by Haydn looks very different without the barrage of accidentals written there, all of those flats, with the key signature instead. It looks a lot cleaner, decluttered, it conveys the same thing. So let me play this for you, and I could be reading from the thing above or the thing below, and they would yield the same result, right? You would be listening to basically the same thing. It's just written differently, and this one is written, I would say, in a better way because it looks cleaner. Here's how it sounds. So, with a key signature, as a performer, I read that, and the idea that I get is the same that I would get from the example below. All B's, notice that the flats are placed on the lines and spaces that are relative to some notes, right? So this third line here is where B would be. There's a flat there showing me that all B's will be B flat. The fifth space here of the treble clef is where E is. That flat is showing me that all E's will be E flats. And here the second space is A. All A's are flat, so A flat. The same thing is happening with the bass clef, right? B flats, E flats, A flats. Because we're playing here, this is a grand staff, I'm playing the same piece with two of my two hands, and they're playing it in the same key. So that's what the key signature tells us, that all B's, all E's, all A's are going to be flat. Or, whatever accidental you have here, that is what it's telling you, that you're replacing that note with an accidental, right? Unless otherwise indicated throughout the piece with a natural sign or something else. So key signatures, they do more than just save ink, right? Which is a big deal. To me, to have something to look at as a performer that looks like this, rather than our first example here, is already a lot better for the eyes, a lot easier on the eyes, and quicker for me to just grasp immediately. But they do more than that. Key signatures save ink, but they do more than that. They are also an indicator of the key of the piece, which is very useful, for performers, for theorists, for whatever, to look at a piece and to know what key it is just by looking at the key signature. So if you see a piece that is in a major key and it has 3 flats, it's definitely an E flat major. You already know that right off the bat. Every major key then has a specific key signature, except for C major. Since it doesn't have accidentals, it doesn't need a key signature. Here's a graph showing all key signatures with sharps and flats. Right? Notice one important aspect of key signatures, the order of accidentals. Let's look at C major being transposed by ascending perfect fifths, giving us key signatures with sharps. Notice here that in G major, I have F sharp, just one accidental. We'll remember that from the circle of fifths, right? G major has F sharp. Now, we have that F sharp happening there. D major will have that F sharp plus a new accidental, C sharp, right? That's what the circle of fifths tells us. C sharp is new to D, and it uses the accidentals that came before, in this case F sharp. So we don't put the accidentals in the key signature in any order. We put them in the order in which they appear in the circle of fifths. F sharp first, C sharp second. The same thing is valid. Look at A major. We have F sharp, C sharp, and G sharp. That's the order in which they appear. F sharp, C sharp, G sharp in the circle of fifths. This, for me, is perhaps the trickiest part of the key signatures, is understanding that the order of the accidentals follows the order of the circle of fifths. And it's tricky only because it presupposes a knowledge of the circle of fifths, right? Either that or just memorizing what the order is. But to me, it's easier if we understand the circle of fifths and then come back to the key signatures. So you can see that with the key with most accidentals, or sharps that is, C sharp major, where all 7 scale degrees have sharps, it's still following the order that they appeared in the circle of fifths. F sharp, C sharp, G sharp, D sharp, A sharp, E sharp, and B sharp. Just the same thing that's happening here. The same thing is true for bass clef, right? Appearing in that same order, and for key signatures with flats. They're appearing here in the order that they did in the circle of fifths. There's one more thing about the placement of accidentals. The order is dictated by the circle of fifths. We know this. The specific place where they appear, though, is something a little less logical. It simply has been handed down to us by tradition. So let's go back to G major here. If you look at G major, you will see that it has an F sharp, and that F sharp is indicated on the 5th line of the staff when using the treble clef. Now, you may think, why not put that sharp instead on the 1st space of the treble clef, which is an F after all, right? Could you do that? Would that be correct? And the answer to that is no. And the reason for that is simply because that's just not how things are done. That's just not what we have been handed down over the centuries. So if you need to indicate an F sharp in your key signature, it'll always be that 5th line of the treble clef and that 4th line of the bass clef, always in that same place. Look at the G sharp where it is indicated with the treble clef. On the 1st space above the staff. You might think, why not use that 2nd line, right? Unfortunately, that's not how it works. We just have to follow tradition, basically, right? What we have been given by our predecessors. So that's how they look like. Anything other than this would be incorrect. That's the correct order and placement of accidentals. If that wasn't gnarly enough, here's a more ink-filled graph here in which we coordinate key signatures with the circle of fifths. On the outside, you can see the major keys. On the inside, the accidentals that are new to those keys, right? And on the outskirts here of the graph, you have the key signatures themselves for all of these keys. That's basically all there is to say about major keys and key signatures. It could be potentially, a very dense topic, but there's not much to say. My advice going forward is make sure you understand the circle of fifths, you understand the key signatures, and that as you read and listen to music and follow scores and perhaps play a lot of this music with your scores, that you can start identifying these key signatures and noticing how kind of omnipresent they are and what effects they have on reading, right, the music, and how keys work in relationship with this idea of key signatures and the circle of fifths. Okay, thanks for watching. In our next video, we'll talk about minor scales, and we'll delve later in the topic of minor keys.